Every week, I receive at least 2 or 3 different PDF files of engineering concepts for various space exploration ideas that have been put forward over the last 20 years or sometimes even longer than that. And every now and then, I come across something that is quite fascinating indeed. A really good, comprehensive mission plan for going to Mars based on technology that we currently have and not technology that might be invented sometime in the future. This idea, called Project Aurora, was put forward by the European Space Agency back in 2003. Well before there was a SpaceX, before there was an idea for Starship, before any of these things existed that today might make traveling to Mars a little bit easier than it was back then. But interestingly enough, even if this concept is outdated, that hasn't stopped NASA from implementing quite a number of the components of this spacecraft into their Mars mission, and assuming that Starship does actually become a mature and practical vehicle, not necessarily even for human transport, but just capable of transporting large amounts of cargo up to low Earth orbit. A vehicle like this is actually much easier and less expensive to build today than it was 20 years ago, which is probably one of the reasons why NASA is interested in implementing so many of its ideas. The task behind Project Aurora was to develop an interior configuration for a transfer vehicle to Mars, and especially a transfer habitation module and a surface habitat module for the Martian surface. The total travel time from Earth to Mars and back for a crew of 6 amounts to approximately 900 days with this plan. Yes, an enormously long voyage, far longer than any space mission that mankind has attempted in the past. But after examining this plan in detail, I believe that a great deal of thought was put into Project Aurora, and I think it's also quite possible that given the technology and spaceflight capabilities we have today compared to what we had in 2003, it could be very feasible indeed to put this mission together by the mid-2030s and finally get mankind to the surface of the red planet. All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. NASA's Lunar Gateway space station has no shortage of critics, but what a lot of these critics don't realize is the fact that the Lunar Gateway is as much a Mars transport vehicle as it is a lunar space station. It actually has a lot of the same characteristics, and a lot of dress rehearsal activities for a Mars mission can be carried out on this space station before we actually attempt a multi-year interplanetary journey. In many respects, the Gateway is as much an interplanetary spacecraft as it is a space station. It has its own propulsion system. It has 2 habitation modules, the HALO module from Northrop Grumman and the IHAB module from Thales Alenia. It even has its own refueling module to continue providing propellant to its propulsion system. And later on, once the station is complete, it's going to add a much bigger habitation module. The reason for this is to accommodate more astronauts, number 1, but number 2, to simulate long interplanetary journeys, because the habitation modules that are currently designed for the Gateway are not nearly big enough for journeys of this magnitude. A much larger habitation module will eventually be added, and once Artemis astronauts have thoroughly tested this module on simulated Earth to Mars journeys, the module will be transferred over to an interplanetary Mars spacecraft for the next step in NASA's Moon to Mars plan. And interestingly enough, NASA's early concepts for a Mars transfer vehicle bears a great deal of resemblance to the Project Aurora ship. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much identical. It has a habitation module for the surface, together with a landing craft, along with a primary habitation space for the astronauts on an extremely long journey that includes not only the necessary supplies, but also a rotating centrifuge that provides at least some artificial gravity for the astronauts. So let's go ahead and go through this design step by step, because I'll tell you, they did a lot of work on this. And by the way, all of this is as the result of the November 2001 ESA Council at ministerial level that approved the Aurora program dedicated to the human and robotic exploration of the moon, Mars, and asteroids. So almost a quarter century ago, ESA was dedicated to landing a crew of humans on Mars around the year 2030, which of course is not going to happen at this point, but might happen 5 years or so later, and returning them safely, ensuring planetary protection for both the Earth and Mars, and also to demonstrate human capabilities needed to support human presence on Mars, to perform exploration and expand scientific knowledge, taking maximum advantage of human presence, including sample selection, and to assess the suitability of Mars for long-term human presence. So this has been ESA's objective for a very long time, and it's quite interesting to see that NASA's Moon to Mars mission is eventually going to accomplish all of these objectives. Kind of makes me wonder just how much influence ESA has had on NASA's priorities over the last couple of decades. But in any event, let's go ahead and have a look at the ship. I'm sure a lot of you are a little bit impatient to get to that at this point. First of all, you have the Mars Excursion vehicle at the far end of the vessel. You can see that it's set up to be a landing craft of sorts, and by the way, in my opinion, a mini starship as proposed by Robert Zubrin could probably fill in for this Mars Excursion vehicle rather than having to design an entire landing craft from scratch. So that's one way that current technology could make this plan even easier. Next up is the Trans-Habitat module, hereafter referred to as the THM, that provides the basic functions for all human habitation during the cruise, such as life support, communications, data handling, and the habitation volume for the astronauts for most of the mission. It's comprised of a central cylinder, which you're looking at right now, which houses most of the facilities and the equipment, and two nodes at the ends that act as connection points with the rest of the mission elements and provides extra volume for the crew. For example, the node at this end of the ship that you're looking at right now also connects to an Orion-type capsule used to descend into the atmosphere to return to Earth, and also to transfer the crew up to the Aurora in the first place. Now, one thing I really like about this design is how much space and mass is dedicated towards propulsion. Keep in mind that this thing is built in low Earth orbit and theoretically doesn't need an enormous amount of fuel and oxidizer to reach Mars, but the idea is to have this ship decelerate into Mars orbit as well, which requires additional fuel, to have extra fuel to maneuver around the Mars system also, so in other words, a lot of flexibility built into this, and also the necessary fuel and oxidizer to get back. So whereas a lot of Mars missions requires the in-situ production of fuel once the mission reaches Mars in order to make the return trip, this ship doesn't require it, which for the first ever mission to Mars, in my opinion, is a pretty good idea. The mass of the ship is quite manageable in terms of how much it would take to get each component into space. For example, the THM would weigh 66.7 tons wet and 56.5 tons dry, easily transportable in a single Starship mission, whereas the Mars Excursion vehicle weighs 46.5 tons. The ERC, in other words, the Orion, weighs 11.2 tons. That's a bit lighter than the Orions we have these days, but keep in mind, you only need this thing to travel up into orbit and then to return, so really a Crew Dragon could probably do the job there. 10.2 tons worth of consumables, 1,083 tons worth of propellant. So we're looking at a lot of propellant here in order to get the job done. 130 tons dedicated to the propulsion system, in other words, the engines. And by the way, that's all the propulsion systems, not just 4 Raptor engines at the back or something like that. You also need to have the maneuvering thrusters, the engines for the landing vehicle, lots of different engines built into this design, but still 130 tons I think would accommodate just about everything pretty easily, especially if you consider that Raptor 3s weigh less than 2 tons apiece. 19.7 tons dedicated to supporting structures, the total mass of the spacecraft at Earth departure therefore being 1,357 metric tons, meaning that 14 Starship missions could deploy the entire thing up into orbit. And by the way, that's what it would also require to get one Starship completely fueled to make the journey to Mars in the first place if we were to go with a Starship solution instead. And Starship cannot get back from Mars without producing propellant all over again on the surface of the red planet. So in other words, you can get the entire job done for approximately the same amount of mass as it requires to deliver Starship on a one-way journey. And the reason this is possible is because the only vehicle that's heading down actually to the surface of Mars is the MEV, which only weighs 46.5 tons plus its propellant, as opposed to landing an entire Starship plus all of its propellant on the Martian surface, which requires a lot more propellant to make the landing and a lot more propellant to get it back up into Mars orbit. Now, the ESA research team determined that 3 different types of habitats were needed for humans to work efficiently on a long journey. First of all, a private zone for crew quarters and personal storage, then a personal zone like command, the laboratory, medical and hygiene facilities, or the exercise facilities where the crew trains and works mostly on their own, and finally a social or communal zone like the galley, recreation, gathering, dining, communications, that sort of thing. So let's have a look at a cutaway of this module as provided by the incredible digital Voodoo. If you are not subscribed to his channel, stop this video now and head over and subscribe. First, you have the command module, including a window cupola. Then after that, there's the social area, providing a space for crew gathering, dining, galley, and infrastructure for conference, and a virtual expansion of the interior space. Exterior windows, by the way, are provided in this social area. Then you have the crew quarters, which is noise isolated from the rest of the ship. It also acts as a storm shelter, which means that extra water is used in this area to increase radiation protection. Water is the perfect radiation shield, and the rigid protection walls plus the water have a total thickness of 50 centimeters, half a meter worth of water protection. Pretty good. Then workstations and a small laboratory and a maintenance area providing working area for the astronauts, and finally the exercise area, which is the largest volume in the entire THM. It houses the centrifuge, life support equipment, and storage units. Keep in mind that the centrifuge portion of this area rotates, providing at least some artificial gravity. Not a lot of it, unfortunately, not a full G, but at least enough to at least partially arrest the progress of bone degradation and muscle loss. And then at the very back, you have the final node, which has extra storage volume, hygiene facilities, the airlock, and the Earth return capsule or Crew Dragon docking port. The overall mass of the THM is 67 tons, with 10.2 tons of that being made up of consumables, and it would also include 480 cubic meters worth of total pressurized volume, or a little less than half the pressurized volume of the International Space Station. And keep in mind, that's just one module. That doesn't include the landing module or anything else, just the primary habitation module. It's 20 meters long, 6 meters in diameter, with 3.5 meters in diameter on the nodes and 5.2 meters long for each node length. And then the solar arrays are 5.1 meters in diameter and 15 meters in length. Okay, so we got the astronauts to Mars orbit with this thing, but how do we get them down to the surface? Well, that's the job of the MEV, or Mars Exploration Vehicle, which is located at the front of the ship. The MEV is actually comprised of two vehicles, one being the Surface Habitation Module, or SHM, which is a cylindrical module that houses the astronauts during their permanence on the surface, providing life support systems and EVA equipment. It also has landing systems such as retro rockets and landing legs located in this module, and it also includes its interfaces with the MAV. Then there's the descent module, which is composed of a deorbiting propulsion system, an inflatable heat shield, a back cover, and parachutes for entry and descent. And then the Mars Ascent Vehicle, or MAV, in which the astronauts return to orbit, mainly comprised of a capsule in which the astronauts are also during the descent, and a propulsion module split into two stages. It provides life support for 5 days, meaning only the MAV needs to get back into orbit, minimizing the amount of propellant that's needed to get the astronauts to orbit. Now, the more perceptive of you may have noticed that there's only space for 3 astronauts on this landing vehicle, and that's intentional. Only 3 astronauts go down to the Martian surface for a 30-day time frame, whereas the remaining astronauts remain in orbit and explore the Martian system. And incidentally, once the Mars astronauts return to the ship, they also are involved in exploring the Mars system as well, because it's going to be a very long time. We're talking nearly 18 months before Earth is going to be back into position for a successful return home. During that time, instead of just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, the astronauts will have an opportunity to explore Phobos and Deimos, for example. They could travel very close to these moons because, keep in mind, they have virtually no gravity whatsoever. You could even use the Crew Dragon to travel relatively close to these moons, or perhaps even modify the Crew Dragon a bit to use tethers to attach them to the moons so that the astronauts could actually explore the moons as well as the Martian surface. Now, it may seem a bit wasteful to send 3 astronauts down to the surface of the red planet for only 30 days during this extremely ambitious 900-day mission. But keep in mind, the whole idea behind this mission is to get the entire job done with onboard consumables, onboard fuel, propellant, everything like that has to be transported with the crew. No in situ resource utilization. If a Mars habitation structure of some kind could be pre-deployed on the surface of Mars, complete with additional supplies, perhaps in situ mining equipment to exploit subsurface Martian ice and use it for greenhouses, drinking water, additional rocket fuel, that sort of thing, then yes, that changes the entire picture of what's possible on the Martian surface. But until all of those procedures are mastered, until we know that all of those things can be done, it's not a very safe idea to send the first Mars explorers out to the red planet with their lives being 100% dependent on this technology being successful. If anything goes wrong, all of these people are going to die, and then the space agencies who sent them in the first place are probably going to have a difficult time convincing their masters in government that they should send another mission. So the entire idea behind Aurora, from the extra radiation shielding to all of the onboard consumables to carrying enough propellant to not only get out to Mars, but also to get all the way back and a round trip to the surface and back as well. All of this is based on safety, providing the maximum possible safety to the explorers and maximizing the possibility of them returning safely. And the entire mission could theoretically be done if we were to get started on it now, because keep in mind, a lot of the technologies that we've discussed in this video already exist. The engines, the propellant, obviously, the solar panels, and even the habitation modules are very similar to modules that are currently used on space stations today, and also modules that are being designed for next generation space stations that will be deployed by 2028, according to the plan as it was put forward almost 20 years ago now. The departure date is April 8th, 2033, with a Mars arrival date of November 11th, 2033, a Mars departure of April 28th, 2035, and an Earth arrival on November 27th, 2035. Think about that for a moment. The prospect of having astronauts triumphantly returning from a mission to Mars in just over a decade. Think it's completely impossible and nothing but science fiction? Well, I think that it would only require a little bit of investment and a little bit of initiative on the part of the world's governments to make something like this happen in 10 years, while all of us are still around to see it. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Once again, please support the work of Digital Voodoo. The link to his YouTube channel is in the description. And also thank you to everybody who's been contributing to my journey to Colorado Springs and the Space Symposium. About 60% of that plane ticket is paid for at this point. If you'd like to help me get the rest of that 40%, it would be very useful to me. All the details are in the description. And once again, until next time, stay angry about space.